Okay,
Perfect. And it looks like we have the full committee, except I don't see Kendra Wokus.
all right. Well, I'm going to call this meeting of the Public Works Committee to order. We do have a quorum present, so we can proceed with our agenda. The first item being the minutes of September 12th.
Ramsey, you move to approve.
Oh,
We have a
I'll
motion.
second.
Motion to approve the minutes, which has been seconded. Any discussion with respect to the minutes? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the September 12th minutes are approved.
I
Item-
missed the second on that.
Don.
Don,
Okay.
second item is Pheasant Branch CIPP pipe lighting bid rejection. You want to give us the lowdown on this? Sean?
Sure, you bet. The short version is that we have a bunch of corrugated metal pipes in the valley area that go down to Pheasant Branch Creek. This one in particular that we've had an eye on for a while here is going down from basically the corner of the high school ball field, the baseball field that goes down into the creek. And it's rusted to the point that we're going to have to do something. So Tom Weber, one of our engineering technicians, has been looking into options, and he was trying to see if we could get a pipe lining inside of the pipe without having to disturb the ground, not to do any excavation or tree removals or anything, and just cure it in place from the inside out, if you will. But the price was prohibitively expensive, far in excess of what we had thought that would cost. So Tom's going to keep looking at that to see what other options we might have and get back to it. But we can't afford this, and I'm not recommending that we try to afford this. We're recommending instead that we just reject all bids.
All right, would you rebid it then or look at other alternative solutions?
Well, I think we'll look at alternatives, but if there's something about this package that the single bidder would recommend changing, that would be fine. I know Tom did tell me that they're very busy and booking into next spring or summer. I forget which. So that might be part of the problem too, is if we could push this to a different time, that might be helpful.
Okay,
How time sensitive is this, Sean?
Well, it's the kind of thing that someday is going to cause a sinkhole. How dramatic that is, I don't know. If it's a little sinkhole, that's fine. If it's a major blowout, that's a problem.
especially if a baseball game's in progress.
Well, we're pretty far from that. But we did have a similar situation, behind where the police department's pond ended up at the edge of the creek. A lot of that was because of a major pipe blowout. That was a rusted metal pipe.
All right, so then the recommendation is rejection of this bid.
Yes. And the recommendation, I think, would go to both Finance Committee and Common Council. I know I just wrote Common Council, but typically bids also go to the Finance Committee.
Committee,
I'll
any
move.
questions?
I can move that we accept Tom Weber's recommendation and reject the bids and pass it on to Finance and Council.
All right, we have a motion to recommend rejection of this bid. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Carl. I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and that will be our recommendation of the Finance Committee and the Council. All right.
Just one quick thing. I noticed that Kendra did join us. Kendra, did you hear enough of that you voted on this issue?
I did vote.
Okay,
Is that,
I'll record it that way then. Thanks.
John, just as a side note, as he looked at pipe splitting, I don't even know if they do that anymore.
This is pretty big diameter. It's 36.
Okay, yeah, it might be difficult then, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I just would have guessed that something like a cured in place would be, this would be a good candidate for that.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry, Bob.
Okay, that's all right. Next item is Parmenter Street Reconstruction Amendment 2 to the Agreement for Engineering Services.
Right, so I wrote up a sort of a recap of the history of how we got to where we got. Sean Ellsworth is here, Tom Stetzer is here. Sean is our project manager. Tom is working on this design from Strand's perspective, working for us. Like I mentioned, we had held on to $15,000 when we sort of throttled back and put it to bed temporarily. But it looks like we're going to need closer to 19.5. A few things have changed in the meantime, including our own standard specs while it's been on hiatus. So the recommendation here is to suggest to the Finance Committee and Common Council a bit of a budget transfer in TIF 3, and then to enter into this amendment to finish the design and get the project ready to bid.
So then what you would need to find, Sean, is $4,500 to augment the 15,000?
Right, something in that ballpark.
Okay. Questions, committee, comments?
Ramsey will move to approve.
That's approving staff
Yeah.
recommendation to,
Staff recommendation amendment 2 for the agreement in the amount not to exceed 19.5.
okay. Is there a second to Dan's motion?
Gayatri, I will second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and that will be our recommendation to the Finance Committee and the Council. All right, moving along. Item number 4, Lake Street Public Improvements Plan Approval.
Right, so I've gotten the packets and we can go there. The apartment complex that's going to replace the former Captain Bill's site at the end of Lake Street down by Lake Mendota is I think it's beginning. They've done some excavation work already to begin on foundations, but there are a couple of public improvements that are noted in the plans as being per terms of the city developer agreement. So this is to the committee really for approval of the storm sewer that'll be public. They're basically rerouting it from site onto the right-of-way, and then the sidewalk itself that's in the right-of-way.
All right, do you want to look at the diagrams, Vinny?
Sure.
That would be helpful.
Bump it down just one. Give you a broad overview. The site used to look like that, and the plan is to make it with apartments up front and then parking in the back. And the storm sewer is this red line through here, and the sidewalk is just parallel to it. Right now, we never did find an easement, but it was clearly designed for the storm sewer to be 5 feet inside the property line, which is almost where the wall of the building is going. So they're going to move it from there out into the right of way.
Okay,
I can zoom in a little on that now that I'm on the right page. Oops.
Are there any issues with that, Sean, moving it?
No, it should be fine. One of the practical implications is we won't have terrace trees here, but instead they're planting trees along the building. So their planting will still be far enough away from the pipe.
so they physically move the existing storm sewer, or they put new storm sewer material in? And
It'll
just
be brand new. Yeah,
brand new, and then they just dispose of the old stuff?
correct.
All right,
And is this something that we typically, like, is this a new precedent? Like, is this something that we typically do?
I think the last time we did something similar to this with a city developer agreement for public storm sewer pipe that was on site was when Sonic moved in. There was a storm sewer pipe that ran kind of down the middle of that site. And they
Yeah.
wanted to relocate it to a far end and go around the building, which makes sense. But they paid to do that, and it being a public pipe, they shifted the easement with it and got a city developer agreement for that. So we don't do this a lot, but as long as it's public anyway, that's we have this process for that.
Okay.
all right, so the question before us this evening is approval of this plan.
Correct. Yep. The public improvements portion of it anyway. So it's the pipe,
Public
the sidewalk.
Questions, committee, comments?
I have a question and I'm gonna try to do it quick because my dog is very loud tonight. Is there any reason, like, is there any special consideration that this piece of property, because of its proximity to the lake, requires? As far
Yeah.
as storm sewer?
Yeah, that's really under the stormwater management plan. So they've got their underground detention under the parking lot up in the northwest corner of the spot. And
Okay.
they've got what they're calling a green roof over part of the parking lot area too.
Okay. Right,
So,
okay.
Yeah,
Still learning how those two things are connected. Thank you.
yep, you bet.
So, and Sean, like you had mentioned the terrace, like that's all standard, like there, 'cause you were saying like the building is, like that's standard though, in terms of, because you were saying there wouldn't be enough room for trees there, but.
Yeah, and it really is an internal sort of policy thing where we don't allow trees within 10 feet of what we call a wet pipe. So water main, sanitary sewer, storm sewer. We find that when we put tree roots near a potential water supply, the roots tend to get into joints or cracks and wreck the pipe, or plug the pipe. And when we have to repair the pipe, we'd end up taking the tree out of the way anyhow. So instead, they're going to put the trees on their side of the property line to give it some distance from the pipe.
But then we don't have any control over what they plant or what they do, right? Like in terms of, I just know that like along city streets, it's good to have trees. And so I just wonder if that would be an issue.
Yeah, so part of it is we have some control in that there's a landscape points requirement for site developments that the planning staff really oversee. So there is some control, but if this tree dies, is somebody going to notice that, oh, by the way, that was required and it was this kind of tree and it has to be replaced? I don't know. It's pretty hit and miss on those kinds of things.
Right. That's what my concern is. Why don't we just leave the line where it currently is? I guess I'm not understanding why we would want to move it.
Sure. You can see this kind of dashed line where it says sod right next to it, just on the far side of the sidewalk.
Mhm.
The pipe is about 5 feet away from that line, give or take, could be 6, but that's also right where the new building foundation is going.
It's
So
already going.
Well, the new one is going to go there. So the existing pipe and the proposed foundation are almost in the same line. In which case they won't be able to build their foundation wall or footings because the storm sewer pipe will be in the way. But even if they took it out of the way and relayed it right next to their building foundation, in the future, trying to excavate to it and repair it would get into problems of trying to get down to the pipe because there'd be no swing room for the backhoe and the balconies would be in the way. So,
But why wasn't it designed in the first place to avoid this issue?
to move the building over 10 feet or so.
My question also.
Yeah,
Yeah. That is one of the things we tossed out at them. I think it came down to their parking lot layout, but part of it too is that we never found an easement. So way back when this thing was laid out and built, clearly they intended the pipe to be on private property, but they didn't cover it with an easement. And that should have been done to give us legal rights for exactly this, but it wasn't.
What about putting it in the street?
We could put it out into the street. Part of what's not great right now is the timing of this whole thing. We're thinking of redesigning the street, but we don't know what it's going to be just yet. So I can't say if this curb line's going to shift or if this curb line's going to shift. It might not, so if we put it out into the street, let me back up again. And we stay 8 feet away from the water main, it would be nearly under the curb line. Maybe we'd have to put the storm on the far side of the street to make that work. So if that's something we feel strongly enough about, I guess instead we'd be asking that the storm maybe be built over here so that they could get terrace trees. And then it's going to be a big expense, incremental expense now, but we're going to rebuild the road in a couple of years. So I don't know. This is, you're not wrong, but this is what we came up with is sort of the best cost effective of the options we looked at.
Is the storm sewer that's there now is otherwise serviceable? There's not a problem with it?
As far as we know, it's in okay shape. Yeah. It's just in a bad spot.
But
The
it's
only
not,
reason it's being
not
moved,
within, it's not within an easement.
Correct.
Ms. Carl, I recommend, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the design as is.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second to Carl's motion?
Ramsey will second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion on this issue?
yeah, I wonder, is there a way, Sean, to add that tree plantings will be required and maintained? Can we say something like that, just to say like, because otherwise, I mean, if they, like you were saying, if they plant something and then it all dies, I mean, it just, from like there's so many benefits to having trees along the streets, especially like, it just seems like we want to add something in there. Can we do that or not?
Well, it's not that we can't add it to a city developer agreement, but like anything, over time, I think it really comes down to the landscaping points requirement. That's a binding sort of thing that says you have to have a certain number of landscape elements for your site. The problem comes into, in 15 years, who's going to know whether a tree died? We don't have staff to routinely run around saying, does this site conform to this approved plan? And whether there's a formal agreement or just a landscape requirement, I think where it falls apart is we just don't have the time to run around looking at all this stuff.
But if there were like maybe citizen comments or something, like if I noticed, right, like if I'm at Harbor and I'm like, oh, that all of those trees are dead, can I bring that issue up, or how does that work?
I think so. I would think that planning staff, and I know Mark Opitz is on the call here, would be able to look at that as a review of the landscaping points requirements.
Okay.
In any event, would that wouldn't be part of this issue, would it? That would be something that we would talk about under this developer agreement.
Well, and even that sunsets. So after we've accepted the public improvements, the city developer agreement goes away.
Oh,
Because that's just about building public improvements and overseeing the warranty period. But this site is going to be around a very long time, we hope. I know that they put those trees into their own property just because they also wanted some green elements to help break up the building and give people the sense of place that trees can provide. So I think they also have a high level of interest in this.
well, if we wanted to do what Carrie suggested, what would be the mechanism to do that? What would you add to this item to require them to plant X number of trees and maintain them?
Well, the plan will take care of the planting of them because they're going to go in. It's the long-term maintenance. So if a concerned citizen says, boy, that site looks really spare in terms of landscaping, they could call City Hall, and I think the planning staff, and maybe Mark's not monitoring his call just yet, but I think that maybe Daphne or somebody goes and takes a look at that and says, look, here's the approved plan, here's what's going on. How are you guys going to get back into compliance?
Does that satisfy your concern, Carrie?
Yeah, that makes me feel better. I'm just trying to think long-term, right? Like if we're gonna allow, you know, it to move over and kind of lose control of our terrace. Just wanted to know how that works. So thank you.
Mhm.
Well,
So
and I just have a question about looking at, they don't have to plant that many trees per their point system, I think, right?
I didn't
But-
review that, so I don't. Oh, here's their grid. So they need 510 and they're putting in 600, we'll call it.
I thought that was points. Isn't that their point?
Points. Yep.
Okay, so how many trees is that?
Well, and they have a 2 canopy tree minimum, so that's how
30.
they got these
Okay.
30 points. So they put in extra canopy trees that they don't have to.
Okay,
And their landscaping plan calls for, I don't know, maybe 6.
because when I looked at the landscaping plan, it looks like they are putting some along the terrace, right? Or I guess it's
Well-
not the terrace, it's along the sidewalk on the inside of it. Okay,
On the inside, yep.
Yeah,
So
okay.
private property.
so there will still be some green out in the front. It's not gonna be, it's just not between the road and the. Okay, thank you for pulling that up.
Yeah, that's what ended up happening.
All right, so we have a motion and a second, I believe. Is there further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Nay,
The ayes have it with Kendra and Carrie being nays. And the motion is carried. So we have approved the plan.
All right. So the next agenda item then is really about, oops, sorry, the city developer agreement that'll spell out that they're going to build these things and give us a 1-year warranty, and there's a financial surety to make sure that that happens.
All right, this is similar to lots of these that we have seen before. I had a couple of questions about this one, Sean. There
Okay.
were a number of areas in the agreement that just said error. I will find one. Look at point number 15 somewhere,
Yep.
page 4 of 19.
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump in really quick. This is Kendra. I have to run carpool tonight. Somebody was sick, so I have to go pick up children. But I just wanted to chime in on this development agreement. I do not approve it the way it is. I think it needs another work through and another run through, because I think it just needs another set of eyes to go over it before we can approve it, I think. But that's my vote.
Okay,
So I'm gonna jump off now.
sure,
Sorry to have to leave.
sure. In
Well,
the
what I-
word, yeah,
My
in the,
question
wo-
was what all these error reference not found things
yeah,
mean.
in the Word version, it's fine, but in the PDF translator, we've had this issue in the past and I didn't catch it before putting it into the agenda. So, shoot.
There
there
are a
are-
number of those.
Yeah, there are a lot of cross references in these agreements, and in the Word version, they tend to work, but sometimes in the PDF translation, they get broken. So I just have to remake the PDF out of the actual Word one. I could maybe try to bring up Word document. That might, oops. It's not letting me, oh, there we are. I was gonna say it's not letting me drag this around. This is I think that's what's going on here. Because I've ran into that before. Nope, this one's broken too. So it's a bigger problem than,
Can we defer this, Sean, to the next meeting?
let me think. I don't remember when they want to get started on this. That's the only reason I'm waffling a bit here. Oops. There we go. But if that's all it is, I can just plug in the paragraph numbers before getting this to finance and council, if you're comfortable with that. These are paragraphs largely that are not used, it looks like.
Well, I noticed that notation on number 15, number 22,
Yep.
number 38, and number 40. Now, there may be more, but those are the ones that I just jotted down anyway.
Right.
And those need to be cleaned up. Kendra,
Yes.
did she give any indication what she thought another set of eyes was supposed to look at specifically in this?
Not the what, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's this very same issue. Yeah, part of, right. So then there's the warranty. Exactly.
Sean, fixing this, does it materially change what the document says?
I don't think so.
No, there's very little in
If
this
it
one.
doesn't-
It's basic.
If it doesn't do that, would people be comfortable then passing the concept of this agreement, because then it would go in a final edited form to finance and council to be acted on in its finality, so that we keep the process moving?
Comments, committee?
I have no problem with that, Sean.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Was that Don?
Yeah, I have no problem with that approach.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm okay.
I feel a
I'll
little.
make that my motion then.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, I feel a little uncomfortable approving a document that has errors in it. I don't know if there's a way to note that, just so that it's clear, like we're approving something that, I mean, it's, I don't know what you want to call them. If they're errors or whatever, omissions, I guess.
Yeah, they're really broken cross references.
Okay,
Well, if we make
as
them,
long as I think we clearly state that that's needed, then I would feel more comfortable.
we make the motion to approve the document contingent upon the various cross-reference items being filled in properly before it goes to Finance Committee and the council. Is that in effect what your motion is, Dan?
Yes,
Does that satisfy your concern, Carrie?
Yeah,
And contingent upon satisfaction of the city attorney,
And the
because
attorney, okay.
on these complicated ones, we tend to do that too.
All right, was your motion seconded, Dan, or not yet? Are we still waiting for a second?
I believe we're waiting for a second.
This is Carl, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and that will be our recommendation to finance and the council. Okay,
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. And so then the last agenda item is re-review consideration of the resolution for the complete streets policy. Mark Opitz, who's on the call, has gone through a lot of iterations of this in the meantime, since the committee last saw it a few months ago. And so we're just sharing it again for to give you a chance for continued input. I'll pop down to it. Maybe.
Sean, as you're going to the document, I'll just give a quick overview. This is Mark Opitz, city planner. The main substantive, well, there's some substantive changes, but the real focus of the revisions was to reorganize the document and have it follow the format that is recommended by the National Smart Growth America organization. The organization headings, of 10 headings, are actually specifically used by Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And so I took the language that you had previously seen and categorized them according to those headings, and then found some additional language and got input from the Sustainability Committee, a couple of members in particular who gave me some fair amount of feedback, and took their input and incorporated into this new format for your review. It's also going to Plan Commission tomorrow night. And the comments that you see in the margins are from our trusty city engineer.
all right. How do we want to proceed with this? You want to look at the comments that Sean, you made these comments that are over in the margin?
I added some in, yeah, just for consideration or committee thoughts.
Okay.
To spur some feedback, yeah.
Well, Sean, with on your first one, SS1, your comment to change from frequent to closed space, closely spaced, I think that makes perfect sense. I
do
agree
too.
with that.
Okay.
All right, so we have, should we go over all of these and see how many we can agree upon and then do this by consensus rather than having votes on each and every one of these?
Works for me.
Okay,
Is this legible on your screens, by the way?
it's a little off on the left side of mine, but it's legible certainly.
Okay. Yeah, it's always, I don't know, on my screen, it's pretty tiny, but I'll squint. So
I have my own version up, so I don't have a
Wait.
problem.
Sean, what he's saying is it's half of a letter is off on the left side, I think is what he was saying. So if you can,
Yeah.
there you go, perfect,
There,
between pages,
perfect.
does this to me. Okay. So what I noticed here is just, it seemed odd that the city administrator is making or determining exceptions in consultation with, among others, the Common Council. And that puts the city administrator in the position of discussing this with the Common Council, and after they make a decision, the city administrator makes a decision.
Do you have any comment, Mark?
Yeah, this was something actually I added after the Sustainability Committee met based on feedback I received. I understand the logic, the logical, the problem with logic, I guess, as Sean mentioned, and I don't have a concern with taking that out. I think the concern from the commenter was to make sure that the council was involved. Ultimately, it should either be the council just making the decision and having that, calling it a day, or the city administrator in consultation with, the subordinate bodies. So however you want it to read, I understand the concern.
I did notice that down in the actual text of this thing about exceptions. Where was that?
It was probably number 4.
Yeah,
Here. So if you copy this list up into the resolution, that might take care of it, because this doesn't have the common council.
Oh, I see. Well, it says the city administrator receives, after consultation with those groups, receives council approval for a document exception. Yeah, I agree those should be the same, and that was the intent.
Okay.
but I had a question about this section too, because this in effect says that the city administrator can authorize exceptions to the policy.
And that, I agree, that shouldn't be. That's what the
Should
the
that,
council's.
that should be the
prerogative.
council or the mayor or someone other, it seems to me, than the city administrator being authorized to make exceptions to the policy.
Well, council sets policy, so council sets policy exceptions.
Yeah, I agree with that. It should be the council that. Because I think
Yeah.
that's how it works now, right? Like we have a sidewalk policy, but then sometimes we make recommendations to the council for an exception. And then the council votes on that.
Yeah, and I think this is basically just saying that the city administrator is consulting with Public Works and Planning and Ped Bike Transit, and then taking it to council for approval or consideration anyway, right? So it's not saying that the city administrator grants an exception. It's saying that he gets council approval for a documented exception. At least in 4A3.
And that is the intent, Sean. I think when I saw this language originally from another community, I think it actually said the city engineer or some person who is subordinate to the city administrator. So actually I elevated it to city administrator and then brought the council reference in there for the reasons that Alder Ramsey mentioned. So I think
Maybe
it reads the way, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest maybe it's confusing because this word authorized suggests the buck stops here, and maybe it should say exceptions may be recommended by the city administrator when all these things happen. And then, oh, by the way, here's the process that requires council approval.
Yeah, because it seems to me in A, it sets up the city as administrators having the authority to make exceptions.
Yeah,
Even after consultation,
Yeah.
the authority still rests with the city administrator, doesn't it? In that language?
Yeah,
so that can just say recommended maybe, and that should fix it.
So exceptions to providing for all modes in each project may be recommended by the city administrator. Is that what you're saying?
Right? Or just say maybe authorized by the common council.
Maybe recommended by city administrator and authorized by the common council?
That's
No.
kind of what 3 says. It just gets into the nitty gritty of how this all happens.
Okay, well, Sean, how about you and I just, we can work it out tomorrow, the language, if you don't want to wordsmith it now. Unless
Okay.
somebody has specific language.
No, I'm just wondering, do we even need to list all that? Could we just keep it simple to just the council approves exceptions or something? I don't know. But yeah, I'm fine with you guys wordsmithing it.
We understand the intent, and I have no quibble with that whatsoever. this is the hazard of taking ideas from different sources and getting a variety of input. So not the hazard, but the result. So,
Right, it's
Hazard and the result.
Yeah.
always iterative, yeah.
but I understand where you're coming from and have, totally, I agree with that.
Okay. So that'll fix that. In the second bullet, I just noted that nowhere in here does it talk about the finance committee, and every time I see the word cost, I'm thinking of the finance committee. So I don't know if it warrants taking these things to them too, or how that gets evaluated absent them.
So add them to the list on the be it further resolved.
Maybe if that's going to be a consideration, I think the council's going to want their input.
So you could say the plan commission, comma, the finance committee, comma, and the common council, just add finance committee before common council.
Yeah, we're going to remove common council from here and rewrite this to match what it said in 4. But we'll list the finance committee if that's what the committee would like to recommend. That's fine.
I think that makes sense. Anybody else want to weigh in? All right, we can do that. Can we go back to point number 2 on this thing, diverse users?
So that's
Oh.
on page, yep.
Here,
Yeah.
okay.
It seems somewhat odd to me that we are setting up a policy that deals with talking about street design here. And the lowest priority of input has to do with operators and occupants of unshared automobiles and freight vehicles. That's what the streets are being designed and built for. I mean, it's nice to accommodate the concerns of pedestrians and e-bike users and skateboarders and rollerbladers and whatever. But somehow or another, it seems to me that putting the basic purpose of the streets, which is to convey automobiles and trucks from point A to point B, as the last point of input, is bending a little too far in the direction of, I don't know, anti-motor vehicle, which, at some point the streets have got to handle. And I just wondered, Mark, why these are ordered the way they are ordered, other than the fact that that's how Cleveland Heights, Ohio did it, apparently.
Well, the whole idea behind the Complete Streets movement is to make sure that we don't just prioritize motor vehicles. That's been our legacy for decades. And the whole point of this movement, as I have come to understand it over the last couple of decades, is to emphasize that pedestrians who are at a significant disadvantage to an automobile because of obviously a difference in mass, that we make sure that we provide safe accommodations along our public streets for pedestrians. So that is why the sequence is written the way it is. If we take the line of thinking that we should make sure we accommodate the automobile, we result in freeways. That's the result that we've had over the years. And now I don't think, Bob, that's the extreme that you mean, but that's the continuum of where we are. And so we have obviously a lot of deaths and injuries in this country, in this state, from caused by motorized vehicle accidents, whether they are vehicles to vehicles or vehicles hitting pedestrians or others. And so the whole idea is to make sure that we design our streets so that they are safer places for pedestrians.
I fully understand that and I fully support that, but this seems to me to say that the top priority in designing a street is concern for pedestrians. And then sequentially down to trucks and cars as the lowest priority. And I mean, I understand that, but what do you do in a situation where the best interest of pedestrians would be to have one of those flashing beacons every 50 yards. That would accommodate pedestrians perfectly well, but it'll have traffic backed up if you do it on University Avenue out to Mazamani in the morning and out to Bree Stevens Field in the afternoon. I just don't understand. I mean, I understand taking those things into consideration and making a high priority, but it just seems to me to say that the last priority when designing a street has to do with unshared automobiles and freight vehicles. I mean, I don't see how you could practically implement that.
Well,
think
and that's
so.
the big policy thing, but I do think the focus is that while within 66 feet or 50 feet in some cases, you know, we're obviously trying to move cars. But let's put a real focus in the design on how do we accommodate reasonably safe accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists who have a right to be there. And everyone else has a privilege to be there. And I think that's a big part of what Complete Streets is heading toward. Is this shouldn't be an afterthought like, oh, we've designed everything we need for cars, and now whatever's left over, let's divvy it up and let people walk, you know, as they may be able to. But let's really just make sure that that's a good facility and everything else is available for cars or trucks.
Yeah, and I think for me, the key is the heading, it's diverse users, and then it's saying when considering the various elements of street design. So I don't think it's saying, you know, I think that language implies, let's think about these other users when we're designing the street. So I think that's why, as Mark was saying too, it's important to kind of go from pedestrians down to cars, because already just the standards and everything that we have in place is already designed for vehicles. So I think that's the key for me, that I feel comfortable with how it is.
Well, I fully understand that, Carrie, and I fully agree with that. I just think when you say that you're prioritizing the needs in a sequence, you're placing the primary purpose of the road, which is to move traffic. I understand the interests of all of the other elements there, but the primary purpose of the road is to move traffic, and you're making that the last priority in street design. And that just seems to be flipping what you've got now is a problem. I agree, but you're flipping it on its head and creating another problem, it seems to me. I don't know how this would be implemented.
I think you're basically taking a standard road design, and then like what Sean was saying is like, okay, let's look at this design and how is this going to impact pedestrians? How about bicyclists, transit riders, and of course vehicles, right? Like I think that's what it's saying when you're considering the elements of the design. That's kind of like the checklist that you'd go through.
Right, so I mean,
What she just said is totally different than what it says. What it says is sequence, and sequence implies priority as far as I read it. So maybe if it just said transportation systems shall be considered as follows. I mean, all of the transportation systems shall be considered as follows. And it doesn't necessarily make it a sequence, it just lists the things that should be considered in the design.
I agree with Don. When you say prioritize and in sequence, that implies a ranking order of all of these things. What's most important, what's least important. And it seems to me that if you take out the prioritizing the needs and putting it in some kind of a sequence, that you just say we're going to take into consideration all of these interests in street design, I fully support that. But I just have a problem with the prioritizing them in sequence, because I don't think as a practical matter you can really design streets that way. That's my opinion.
would it help to change the word sequence to order, in the following order, or in the following priority order?
Do you have to say priorities at all?
Well, I think, again, I mean, the whole point of this thing is to make sure that pedestrians and bicyclists don't get pushed to the side to say, well, we need more and more and more for autos, and then there's nothing left for pedestrians and bicyclists. Otherwise, I don't know that we need a complete streets policy if they're not going to have some sort of hierarchical, preference in design elements to say, yeah, this is important enough that if we can't get on street parking, we can't get on street parking. Or if we need more right of way, we need more right of way. Instead, because otherwise we have bicyclists on Century Avenue and we are in the midst of a pretty significant retrofit with property acquisition to try to figure out how can bicyclists use the Century Avenue corridor.
Yeah, I agree with that, Sean. And I mean, if I feel like this has been through a number of committees, that if the people that are actually designing the streets weren't concerned about this, I would, if staff, or if they didn't have an issue with that, I would probably rely on their expertise. So I don't think that it's going to be impossible to design streets in this way.
Well, and I don't think it's one or the other. I mean, and frankly, I don't look at this in this sequence to say, okay, let's figure out what are pedestrians going to get out of the right of way. Now, what about bicyclists? What are they going to get out of the right of way? When we're looking at Bellefontaine through Bell Farm, the whole thing is looked at together, but we say things like, shouldn't there be adequate terrace area as a meaningful buffer between the sidewalk and the back of curb? And shouldn't there be, a bike way along here? If on-street bicycling might be uncomfortable because they're going to share with parked cars and through traffic on a 2-lane road with relatively high volume. So there's a bike path, right? It's not like, well, go fend for yourselves, or maybe we'll go paint a Sharrow someday. It's just built in from the ground up.
I understand all of those concerns. I would just be more comfortable if it said, when considering the various elements of street design, the city shall consider the needs of the transportation with the following groups in mind, or something of that nature, not prioritizing them in sequence. That just seems to me to set something up in stone that is going to be very, very difficult to put into practice. But again,
Okay.
that's my opinion.
Yeah, and if you look at 1B, it's the same kind of thing. It basically is saying the advantages of complete streets is that it eliminates a lot of car traffic. That's really what it's saying. So it saves a whole bunch of money on parking and all that kind of thing. I mean, I don't see the complete streets thing as a 1B issue, frankly.
Sorry, I don't know if I follow what you're saying, Carl.
Well, read it. I mean, it says the complete streets is saving money.
Right, because
by
some people
enabling
don't
residents
have to-
to have more income. Or
Yeah, if they're able to bike.
how does that happen? It doesn't
Well-
make any sense.
Well, if they're able to bike to work, for example, then they don't have to pay money to put fuel in their car. If there's more public transportation, that also costs less than putting fuel in their car. If they're able to.
Exactly. It's trying to eliminate the automobile traffic.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't see complete streets as trying to eliminate automobile traffic. It's a safety issue, and it's trying to make sure that the streets are designed for all users.
Right. But then that's the thing,
But
like,
that's not 1B says. 1B's goal is to eliminate car traffic.
I'm trying to find that myself where it says no
Yeah.
cause.
It's right there under the highlighted part.
city government spending less to construct and maintain
Yeah.
facilities for storage of motor vehicle parking.
Okay, so that's parking.
And
you know.
by greater use of the transit system, which in turn helps it to operate more efficiently and cost effectively. Having greater proportion of land available for green space, eliminating parking, or activity-oriented land uses will enhance public health and provide more opportunities for stormwater storage and infiltration. I don't see the complete streets philosophy being, the purpose of it being to eliminate automobile traffic or to reduce it significantly. I think the complete streets philosophy is built around making sure that all users can use it safely.
But maybe then, I mean, but if we do design streets where there are more people biking instead of driving, that would probably reduce traffic. So it is like that this could happen, and I think it might be
Well, imagine if,
secondary
Gary,
goal, right?
if all streets in Middleton were like State Street, it would not be workable. I mean, there are a lot of people who are not that interested in tromping up and down a street, who prefer a little convenience and parking and all of those structural, infrastructural benefits. I mean, I don't know that Middleton taking the view of, kind of like a California streets like promenades will work.
I don't think that's what this is saying though, right? Like, again, it's just saying, like, it's saying like, if we have more options for people, right? So if you're able to bike, a bus,
But as
or
Carl said,
drive,
1B is kind of encapsulating the whole direction that the complete streets policy takes in that direction as to elimination of all automobile traffic. And how can that be done? By reducing the infrastructure and benefits that are afforded to it. If you have to walk a mile to park, find a parking spot, some of them may not be interested, right? They would rather walk to that space, or people like me would just avoid it completely, would just not go there.
I guess I'm not following, but someone else jump in. Like, I'm not following that B
I
says
didn't read.
that at all.
I didn't read this to mean we will not have any on-street parking anywhere ever. I read this more to mean that there are more important things going on than parking on a street in some cases. So if we need to, in fact, we have already converted some on-street parking lanes to 2 bike lanes and still have on-street parking on one side of the road. Not all neighbors are thrilled with that, but it provides bike facilities at almost zero cost. It just means that people have to consolidate parking to one side of the street, but there's still plenty of on-street parking.
Yeah, I read this as, again, diverse uses, right? Like, we're trying to make our streets available for all, and that there may be some cost savings for our residents potentially. I guess I don't see the elimination of cars in this at all.
I think it's just a wonky paragraph altogether, really. It's it says a bunch of stuff I don't think that we need
That may
cost
be-
savings. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not
Because
sure why that's even in there. I agree with Bob and Carl. The whole point of this complete streets process is we want to make sure that when we're putting streets together, that all users have a safe experience with the street. And some of the byproducts of doing that would probably be that maybe we have parking on one side of the road, like Sean was saying, and bike lanes on the other side. But this whole paragraph with cost savings are achieved by, I just think the whole paragraph is a little wonky and clunky and doesn't really say anything, but gets the committee debating it.
Doesn't have anything to do actually with the policy. Of
Yeah, not
course,
really.
Well, that makes sense since we're all kind of debating what it means, right? Like, so maybe we do need to just rework it.
Yeah, I think you could pretty much slash the entire paragraph and not really lose sight of what we're trying to do.
I think that's a good observation. Well, I don't know if we're being very helpful to you, Mark.
Any feedback is helpful because ultimately this requires the council to approve it. And I'd rather have this discussion at the committee level and come up with the best policy statement for the council before they consider it.
Yeah,
So-
maybe, and but I think if we scratch B, does A encompass it completely? I don't know if it.
That was my only observation, Carrie, was that the section here was called vision and intent. And I thought B was kind of more explaining why complete streets policy is important. And again, I borrowed this heavily from a couple different sources. Whatever you decide or whatever you recommend, obviously Plan Commission will also be considering this as well. But the idea was to have vision and intent in this section.
Could it be simplified, do you think, instead of striking 1B, to simplify it at a very high level, just to say by constructing only the amount of pavement necessary for users, there are benefits to stormwater or, reconstruction costs, or, just keep it sort of high level without getting into specifics like storage. And just say, just build what we need and no more. Because most of the rocks that get thrown at us we've got these really wide streets and 2 lanes of traffic and almost nobody ever parks there. And why do we need all this pavement? And, it's not wrong. That was just the standard at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the idea, Sean, because I think it's important to kind of add a little bit more to the vision intent so we can kind of go back and remember why we're doing this. Because people will question potentially, right? So it'd be good to have the benefits listed.
I can rework this. I'll work with Sean on it tomorrow. I would rather, less is often more. And this policy got a lot longer than I wanted it to be anyway. So if there's ways to shorten this, I'm all ears.
Can you encapsulate it in 2 or 3 sentences? Because really, I think A says everything that we're intending to do. So B is just, can we do, like I say, 3-4 sentences, short sentences that just encapsulate whatever benefits there may be and move on?
Yeah, Sean had an idea, which was by constructing the only the amount of pavement we need, or we'll have something and then it can just list benefits.
And one other question, just an observation. If we say that businesses will come forward to, reduce this from a marketing standpoint, if a street, take for example, Hubbard Avenue, if you say we're going to stop all traffic there, it's only a promenade, how quickly are the business owners on that street going to come back and say, heck no, it's not working for us, nobody's coming in? The footfalls from the street are going to be very less compared to people who drive in or maybe who are driving down and stop by and, kind of shop off the cuff, those kind of things. So making it, I agree from the environmental standpoint and all of that. But if you're saying that businesses are going to come back forward with this to restrict traffic or automobile traffic, then I don't think it's in their benefit at all.
Okay.
Anyone else have any comments? So, Mark, you're gonna take a look at putting together some simpler language for point B under number 1. And then did we come to any conclusion under number 2 about prioritizing and sequencing things?
I think I were added in a sequence as a result of the CLC feedback. If those 3 words were removed, I don't think it harms the paragraph.
Which 3?
The in a sequence. The city shall consider and prioritize the needs of users of the transportation system as follows. If it reads like that, I don't know I mean, just by having it numbered sort of implies the sequence anyway. So if that's something that people are concerned about, I don't think that there's harm in removing it.
Well, I think that makes it better. I don't know that that cures it, but that certainly makes it better from my perspective.
I can live with sequence being taken out.
Yeah,
Do you have
I
any
agree
clear
too.
market if we take out the word vulnerable too? Because truck operators are just not that vulnerable.
Agreed. That's fine. The term came from our comp plan and it's a term we've been using, but I think I'll flag it for the plan commission tomorrow.
Okay. That's cool.
So you would take out the 3 words of the most vulnerable as well and just have it consider the needs of users of the transportation and prioritize the needs of the users of the transportation system as follows. Eliminate in a sequence and the most vulnerable. Is that what you're suggesting, Sean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, concerns, questions, committee? Well, we don't really have to do this in a motion then, do we, Sean? Is there?
Nope. We're just trying to provide feedback.
Well, Mark, I hope we've provided you some feedback without totally butchering the draft.
You focused on 1, 2, and 4, and Sean had some additional comments. Are there any others you wanted to react to? Maybe some of them didn't require reaction, but especially
well,
performance
one
measures.
comment on are these communities well defined when we're talking underserved areas in the city of Middleton? I think I'd be hard pressed to find those.
I think at some point, we don't have all the data that is identified here. I think the idea is it's more the concept, the philosophy that we want to make sure that people who don't participate don't have as many opportunities to participate, whether it's advocacy for themselves because they work 3 jobs or kids or caregivers, whatever the situation is, people who have more limited means than many. We want to make sure that that concept is embodied in this resolution. I don't know that it really needs to be more defined or mapped. That was the idea behind it anyway.
I agree with that, Mark. It's just like, it's basically acknowledging that there may be, and again, this is a plan that we want to keep in the future as well. So I think it's just making sure that we're thinking about that, right?
That was the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with Sean's comment on D in that paragraph, that should be moved up to 2B as another user.
Well, I think the reason why I kept it separate is because Actually, this is something I added. I don't think this was in the model language that I found. I saw this in other communities, or maybe I thought of it on my own. I don't remember, or feedback from someone. The reason I kept it separate and not part of the list is because that's kind of an overarching, we always want to make sure that emergency responders and street maintenance vehicles, that, we don't want to design facilities that can't be properly meet those important needs. So that's why it wasn't part of the list.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you mind maybe just moving it up then to either, I don't know, precede or immediately follow B? So at least they're together?
And then you're de-emphasizing the underserved communities.
Yep. Which I don't know where they are anyway, so I'm okay with that. Let's get the emergency responders taken care of.
And then street maintenance crews.
I don't think, I mean, I don't know if that matters that much. It's part of the A, B, C, D, E. I don't know if those are listed in priority, so.
No, it just felt like, oh, here's all these users. And then, by the way, here's this other thing. Oh, and here's some more users.
Yeah,
You know,
I could see that, I guess.
So
I'm
you could,
especially, well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you could just swap the positions of C and D.
That's what I heard. Yep. I want to make sure you leave time for performance measures number 8, but maybe you're still going through these in sequence, if you will.
we already talked about 4.
Right.
Did anyone have anything on 3? I didn't.
This was, by the way, I will just make a comment on 3. That's also a concept that was not, I'm trying to remember where I got that idea from. So at one point I was proposing to call this the complete and green streets policy. Actually, maybe that was Cleveland Heights. Madison also on their website, it looks like they're working on a complete and green streets policy, but when I last checked, they hadn't posted any updated information. I decided to take out the and green because to me, why would you modify the word complete? Complete to me means, well, everything. So part of good street design, of course, is making sure we don't create environmental problems, flooding, runoff. We want to make sure we address all these things. So this is the section on water quality, which I reviewed with Sean and Eric in Public Works, our stormwater engineer. And so this language came from them largely, which is probably why Sean doesn't have any comments.
Or maybe I just, yeah, I just didn't see anything. I thought, well, that just seems obvious.
Yeah. Number 5, I think was, or that's jurisdiction. Yeah. I don't think you had comments on that, Sean.
No,
That's
We-
what design.
we only have some influence anyway on WISDOT's up to, so.
Right. Oh, this last one, the last sentence of design. This was a very late addition coming from the Conservancy Lands Committee. And Sean, I asked you about this last week. The idea that asphalt having a black color to it tends to absorb heat. And so the suggestion that someone made at the CLC was maybe we should be using concrete to help reflect light and avoid the heat island or reduce the heat island effect.
Yeah.
And so that's where this sentence, but Sean, you pointed out that wasn't very practical from a cost standpoint.
Yeah, it has a really big, well, cost and operating standpoint. To patch a concrete road is a whole different animal than patching an asphalt road.
Right. So that's why this language evolved the way it did.
If it were up to me, I would take that whole sentence out.
Okay.
But if the Common Council wants us, right now, you can't even buy concrete. They're rationing it to contractors, but someday
Well-
when concrete's commercially available again, it's gonna be really expensive.
So I'm, like I said, that sentence was added in response to a comment I had received. So any feedback you have on that is welcome.
Sure.
Do you want to in or out, I guess?
I mean, personally, I don't have because it's got where feasible from a life cycle and cost standpoint. It doesn't really matter to me one way or another. I mean, if we were in Phoenix, Arizona, it would matter to us a great deal. But for where we are, it isn't as much of an issue, but so I could go either way, really. I don't think it hurts to have it there.
I'll flag it as the planning commission has Sean's comments, so I will.
I mean, 10 years from now, who knows? Maybe asphalt will get extremely expensive and concrete will be cheaper. I remember times when asphalt got very, very expensive, and it was pretty much 6 one, half a dozen of another on some projects. So you never know.
Yep.
Maybe we can move to number 8, performance measures.
Okay.
There wasn't any, unless somebody has a question about number
Does
7.
everyone else know what involuntary displacement means?
I thought that was a good point that you made, Sean. What is that intended to mean, Mark?
Well, it was specifically a reference to displacement of people, but it could also mean property. But I think specifically people in this context is where I try to remember where that idea came from.
But by people, you would probably mean property, right? In which case,
right, but that affects people, right?
But in which case, we kind of already have a system in place where we would have to follow all the eminent domain laws. So we're already, from a statute point of view, we already. I mean, we try to avoid it simply because we don't want to pay relocation costs or whatever. But I'm just not sure it's needed. We already have to follow the laws as written now anyway.
Okay, I will flag that for tomorrow's discussion as well.
Okay.
I struggled with this one quite a bit. The last thing I want to do is, I mean, we want to have accountability, obviously, but we also don't want to have a new, because we don't want to require that have data collection require the addition of a staff person. So where's that balance of having accountability and not having an onerous workload? So that's the context for this list, and the list got lengthened based on feedback I've received. Number 4 specifically, we have, because I was wanting to know how we could count those people, we do have a counter system according to our Parks and Rec staff. I'm not saying that I would never see us going around counting every street in the city. I mean, that's just not prudent. We're not going to do that. But we do have the means to do some counting in targeted areas. So I guess to answer Sean's question, yes, I guess the thinking is if we can, take a sample or pick certain areas where, we would be particularly interested in knowing trends, that's how we could use that, but I don't want to create too much work for us either.
Yeah, that's what I wasn't sure is what's our goal here? Because if we want trends, we have to have targeted intersections or spots.
Yeah, I mean,
really?
well, for example, the Allen Century intersection is very difficult for all users of the intersection, especially for pedestrians, bicyclists. It's, requires multiple stage crossings, and if we found some way to improve the intersection and how it functions for pedestrians and bicyclists, and if we found a way to improve the intersection in some way, we'd like to be able to measure how it improved. So that would be an example of, I think, where we would do some counting.
Okay.
The question about number 5 with near collisions, what some people call near misses, I prefer to call them near collisions. We don't track that now, and I doubt very many of those get reported to the police. I think this was also feedback I received. I'm not sure how we would collect that data, other than to encourage the public to report near collisions.
To whom would they report them?
Well, I guess if you report a crash to a police officer, the police department, I guess you could report that to a dispatcher as well, or encourage people to contact the public works office. I don't know, Sean. It's the issue is, you know, a near collision could easily have been a collision, and you know, if there's a pattern of many near collisions, then it's just someone's unlucky day if it suddenly becomes a collision. So I don't know how we would. That's why I wrote as a parentheses, the public should be encouraged to report.
Yeah, I'm just never sure what to do with those, because I get occasional calls like, oh, someone almost hit me, but I don't know what that means. Were they in the next lane, or were they
No, I
coming
understand.
right at you, or?
Right. Well, let me use another example. So the addition of a 4-way stop on, oh, it's technically a 3-way stop on Parmenter at Hubbard. You know, that was done in response to requests. People requested the all-way stop condition, right? And you'd like to know, you know, were people nearly getting hit? Were they hit? You know, you tend to hear from people on the street or in the community. You tend to hear if they can perceive an intersection to be unsafe. And we put the stops on Parmenter in, and now, you know, there might be near collisions if somebody, but if somebody's walking in the street, but because the drivers are expected to stop, you know, maybe those collisions are not as significant anymore. Maybe it's not as much of a threat. I mean, I know what this means. I just agree it would be hard to measure, but I'd like to know from people, and we tend to hear from the public when Elmwood Avenue, for example, is when people feel that that's when they felt that wasn't safe, we heard about it. So I think there is a reporting system for, I mean, I think people aren't afraid to contact their council member or the public works staff or planning when they know of near collisions. Ped bike conflicts in the Conservancy. We hear of that from one of our members on the Ped Bike Transit Committee who was concerned about user conflict. So I think there are ways that people report those concerns.
Okay, well, if someone has an idea of what we're trying to capture and or track and or organize, I'm open to it. I don't know how to keep track of that, or even really what it means exactly.
And it's likely that these things are going to get reported to different entities. Some will get reported to Public Works, some may get reported to the police department. If they happen in the conservancies or whatever, they get reported to the park department or the Conservancy Lands Commissioner or whatever. And I mean, I don't think it hurts to try to collect this data, but it's going to be a very imprecise measurement because I suspect the vast majority of these things are going to go unreported to anyone anyway.
I could see a department head meeting where, you know, if this becomes adopted city policy, that every department head is encouraged to, you know, there'll be a discussion amongst the department heads for a few minutes saying, okay, who's going to collect this? To whom should we report these? You know, I could see that being an outcome. So, and maybe since I'm kind of the de facto ped bike planner, maybe I become part of that loop too. I don't know. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that there's ways that can be tracked.
Okay. I was just mentioning in 7, you know, if we're measuring reduced greens or improved green space, we'll have to measure reduced green space too when we're adding pavement someplace.
Yeah. I was trying to get away from having an amount be part of this when this idea surfaced. because I think this is going to be one of those that could easily become a very time-consuming calculation, and I don't think we're, none of us want to create work unless it's meaningful work, meaningful results.
Yeah.
So again, more philosophically, we want to make sure we minimize. I think, Sean, you said it a few minutes ago very well. Don't put more pavement in than is absolutely necessary. How do we measure that?
Well, the beauty there is going to be in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
No matter what we do, it'll be wrong. But as long as we can point at why we did it, I feel okay about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's I don't want to beat this thing to death. We're been at this for a while, but I'm not sure the amount of pavement or impervious surface is really germane to the complete streets, the safety. I mean, that's what I thought that's what the complete streets was supposed to be, was for the safety of all the users, and then the impervious surface, and isn't that more stormwater and a water resources issue, as opposed to, I mean, it's almost like we're trying to make this document overarching, fit all. It just seems like we're trying to put a lot of stuff in that is making it more confusing to what we're trying to do.
This was part of the concept of adding the and green streets concept. And, I hear what you're saying, Dan. This isn't in a traditional complete streets resolution. I think that's a safe statement. That would be a safe statement to make.
Well, I guess I'm from a public works, from my standpoint, when we first started down this road, complete streets was supposed to be, how do we design our streets to make it more usable or more friendly for all users? And it seems like we're getting a little off track.
Well, I think number 9 wanders a little bit and number 10 does as well.
Well, and number 6 is going to create some problems when we talk about Saks Woods in a few years.
Where we talk about what?
Saks Woods. We
Why
got,
is that?
there's a lot of trees in the way of sidewalks.
Well, number 6, I asked Mark Wagner if we already are doing these things. We already tally that up every year. So that's data we already collect. I think that's a Tree City requirement.
Yeah.
So that's why I wasn't worried about adding that one.
And potentially if we narrow streets, right? Because I think going back to like what is needed, right? Like how much pavement is actually needed, we might not have to cut down those trees like we normally would, right? Because we're moving everything away from where they're planted.
The big reason why we don't narrow streets more than and I wish we would narrow them more, but I understand why we don't. It's because oftentimes the curb and the gutter system doesn't need reconstruction or doesn't need replacement, as I understand it, Sean. So let's pick on Clovernook Road as an example, or Sand Hill in Northlake. These streets are 36 feet wide, if I'm guessing, and seldom have people parking on both sides. Very seldomly do you see on-street parking. They could obviously be narrower, but the reason they don't get narrowed when they're reconstructed is because the concrete usually still is quite durable and needs just spot replacement. And it would cost a lot more to narrow the streets, or at least on one side, because you have to change the storm sewer system as well. Is that a fair summary, Sean?
Yeah, it's really the curb and gutter, but the storm gets into it. And then the other issue is, well, do you narrow one side or do you narrow both sides so that both people get the benefit of a wider terrace? And it really just comes down to a cost issue from my perspective. If the Common Council wants that, it has a cost, we can do it.
So, I mean, if we know a street that the lion's share of the curb and gutter has to be replaced, then that's a very good candidate for narrowing.
And I think part of this is like the complete streets. I think what you were saying before, Mark, does encompass green, right? Because some of these features do have a positive environmental impact. And so I think the performance measures are helping us to maybe measure those good things that will be kind of a result of implementing the complete streets. But if some of these are like right now, it sounds like maybe we just maybe don't have mechanisms in place to actually measure these. Maybe we shorten the list for now. Is it something that we could add to at a later date? Like, is that something that we can say like, oh, we want to start measuring a few more things? I don't know. That's just if that's kind of the concern.
Well, as I said, the list is the result of, and the document is the result of several different committees providing input. And so at some point, I want to try and find a consensus and take something to the council that isn't going to be referred back to committee, for further editing. The goal is to try and do the committee work in committee.
Yeah.
So, I understand what Alder Ramsey is saying, that we've incorporated some things that go beyond the traditional complete streets definition. I would just say that that's also a reflection of the times we are in, where there's more awareness and concern about stormwater runoff, quantity, quality, and climate change as part of a complete streets concept. So that's why it's evolved the way it has.
Right. I was thinking more in 8 and 9. I mean, they're not even really road related.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to add, what is Roman numeral 10 under 8 add to the concept of street design?
If you would like to recommend removing them, I'll just simply flag that for the Plan Commission tomorrow. I'm just trying to come up with a document that's going to be supported at the council.
I think from my perspective, again, this document is trying to change how we do things currently, right? So I think 10 is trying to basically, again, are we engaging everyone to help, maybe there's something we're not thinking of that would help make the Complete Streets program applicable for all people. And so I think that's what it's trying to say is like, let's make sure we're bringing everyone to the table and getting their feedback.
That's well said.
Well, I appreciate that, Carrie. I understand that, but I mean, in terms of the policy itself for complete streets, I don't know that, I mean, we have this document, including a lot of very aspirational things that don't have much to do with street design and construction itself. But I mean, it's fine if you want that kind of language in there, but it doesn't seem to me to add anything very practical to the process of street design and construction. But all right, anything else on performance measures, or what do we move on to next?
There really wasn't much else. Wasn't sure what to do with 10B. It seems we want to make a predetermined short list of acceptable consultants who have shown leadership in implementing complete streets. But I'm not sure how to measure that. And so I just kind of flagged that, like, are we trying to make a list?
I think there wouldn't be a consultant in the world that wouldn't say in their presentation or proposals that they are a leader.
I either, especially if it's required.
I mean, I've done numerous presentations and PowerPoints to city administrators. We were always the best.
Did we say experienced then instead of leaders so that we can look at their projects?
It's I think it's a pointless statement because they're not going to come in and say they're not experienced or they're not leaders.
Demonstrated experience or something like that is better than leader. I would agree.
Yeah.
I think that's,
Demonstrable experience or something like that.
Yeah.
Again, some of this is just language from another source, and then I just kept it.
Honest, Mark, we're not blaming you at all.
Oh, I'm not taking any personal offense whatsoever. So I'm not, honestly.
Well, and I'm not sure experience is good. I mean, how often are, this is a new thing, isn't it? I mean, how many of these consulting companies have had experience designing to a policy like this?
every one of them tell you they have.
Well, but you can tell from their resume, from the projects they provide in their RFPs, you can sometimes tell, who you're going to get more innovative, who has done more innovative work. I mean, we want, so many times the consultant proposals are just cookie cutter. You're lucky. Sometimes you're lucky if they change the name of the community that they're responding to. So I think we want to make sure that we get thoughtful proposals from people who have demonstrated that they have done the type of project that we're looking them to help with. So
Yeah, that sounds good, Mark.
all right, well, I've gotten a lot of notes here, and I will work on this tomorrow, Sean, with you. Well, actually, no, I won't, because you're out of the office.
Yeah, you probably won't.
Okay, I'll
You could call me.
well, if you're out of the office, I'll respect that.
Maybe.
What I'll do at least is flag this, flag where the discussion was. Are you planning to have the minutes of the meeting done tomorrow, or are you waiting with that till you get back?
No, I'll probably have this done tomorrow.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
All right, thank you, Mark. I hope what we provided to you was helpful and not just all tearing things down that had been proposed, but I think some of the suggestions were on point, and I hope will be incorporated in the final policy.
Yeah, exactly. I too appreciate the work you've put in on this, Mark. I know it's
Absolutely.
difficult pulling everything together and trying to get as much input as you can, and you can't take all of it. But
Well, yeah, when it's directly contradicting, sometimes people have contradictory views. So it's, at some point, somebody's got to make a decision.
yeah.
So, all right, thank you all.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank
Yep.
you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Mark.
All right, that was our last agenda item.
All right. I
I'll make
think
a motion to adjourn.
we have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second to Carrie's motion?
Second,
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Anything-